Welcome. I'm Steve Welving, one of the founders and organizers of Ed North, and we're pleased to be collaborating with NovoEd today for our event. I want to thank especially Scott Kinney, who's one of our Ed North board members, for his role in today's event. I want to thank the NovoEd team also for putting this excellent program together. For those of you new to our programs, Ed North supports entrepreneurs who are trying to solve problems in the education and training sector. We do this mainly by organizing learning and networking events. Our events are free thanks to our sponsors. So if you'd like to learn more about Ed North or our sponsors, please find us at ednorth.org. Actually, for the last 7 years, Ed North has organized over 80 learning events. But today's program breaks some new ground for us. This is the first time we've been exploring the corporate learning sector, but we hope to do more programs around corporate learning and training in the future. So I'd like to turn this over now to Todd Moran, who's the Chief Learning Officer for NovoEd. And for Ed North members who might not be familiar with NovoEd, which is an online collaborative learning platform developed at Stanford University several years ago. And now it focuses primarily on the education, rather the enterprise learning and leadership development area. So Todd, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you, Steve. I really appreciate that. And welcome to everyone. I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming three really smart people to share and talk and dialogue with one another and with each of you today. So without further ado, let me bring them on screen, if you will. We can't bring them up to the fireside chat dynamic of this panel, but I can certainly pin them as a focal point. So first, let me start with this incredible individual. She spent the better part of 15 years spanning 3 continents and serving in a myriad of professional capacities. So much of that focused on global organizations and helping them align their business strategies with leadership and talent development solutions. Currently serving as the Executive Director of Executive Education at the Carlson School of Management under the University of Minnesota umbrella, and also a member and anchoring the Dean's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, as well as a board of director at Unicon, for folks that are familiar as the global consortium of university-based executive ed programs. So despite her travels to Brazil and Mexico and Argentina and Spain, she is hunkered down squarely in the Twin Cities. Nora Anderson, it's an absolute pleasure to have you with us.
Such a pleasure to be here. Nowhere better to be than Minnesota.
Good. Next up is a gentleman who his time in this industry taps well beyond the 38-year mark. To say that he's a seasoned veteran would be a gross understatement. This individual has spent the better part of his life really focusing on human performance improvement solutions and doing that at scale for large organizations around the world. He's a prolific writer, recently published co-authored a fantastic book called Unplugged, How Organizations Lose Their Energy and more importantly, how to get it back. And he is currently the Chief Operating Officer of Wilson Learning Worldwide and the President of Wilson Learning Worldwide Japan. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome Tom Roth with us today.
Thanks so much, Todd. And I'll echo what Nora said. It's great to be in Minnesota rather than on an airplane somewhere.
Smart are both of you in that regard. And then last but certainly not least, we're joined as a third panelist, individual who I had the pleasure of working closely with. He is the CEO and chairman of NovoEd, has spent many a decade working in the technology and services business space, has a wonderfully unique vantage point as both stewarding the direction of NovoEd as its CEO, as I mentioned, and chairman, but also as anchoring and leading the education technology team at Devonshire, which is the private investment arm of Fidelity. So Scott Kinney, it is tremendous to have you with us.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. Great to have everybody here today. I'm also in Minneapolis as well, and there are days I wish I was in San Diego, but it's a glorious sunny day today.
I'm quickly recognizing, Nora, Tom, and Scott, that we were the folks that scheduled this late in the week, late in the day session. It was probably remiss of us not to invite people to grab a beverage of their choosing and sit in dialogue while we dialogue with one another. So perhaps something to improve for next time, Steve, as we expand the footprint of Ed North events to the world. So let's do this. There is a lot that we'd love to unpack today as a team, and deeply encourage all of you, as Adam had mentioned at the outset, to interact with us. Please use that chat function. I think it might be a little unruly to come off mute, but if you focus on the chat, we'll try to get as much of that into the dialogue as possible. So we're going to talk about a little bit of some characterizations on a look back in 2020, without question, the emergence of some trends and those that will continue forward into 2021. And I'm going to ask these brilliant folks to put a bit of their futuristic heads on at the close and talk predictions for beyond. But before we do that, I think it would be really helpful for all the folks that are joining us today to get a sense of your lenses, because you each come with a rather unique one. Nora on the executive ed side, Tom leading one of the premier learning training providers in the space, Scott in terms of your vantage point on high from the nature of Devonshire and what you're seeing emerge in the space and for enterprise customers. So let's do this. I will give you 90 seconds. I'm gonna try to hold you to it. Let's do a little bit of a state of the state opener. Nora, can I turn to you and talking from the vantage point of executive ed and what you're seeing?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Todd. It's great to be here with everyone. Looking forward to this dialogue. As I think about where we're at right now, and with those two lenses of looking back and looking forward, I can characterize that in two ways. On one hand, looking back and looking forward, challenging and overwhelming. I think that goes without saying. And at the same time, exciting and exhilarating. And I know we'll get into aspects of this. So when I say the challenging and overwhelming, we just look back to March, where it's almost a year now when things just came to a grinding halt. I'm imagining that fateful week in March here in Minnesota, and I believe it was a Thursday, we're running 2 programs, and I'm there with my team saying, do we come back in person tomorrow? We did, in fact, but we sure didn't the next Monday. And from there, just moving, bringing things to a halt, moving things online, all of those transitions, the financial impact, navigating all these factors, very challenging, very overwhelming. At the same time, we always talk about those silver linings. And some of those are the excitement that comes with this. We were able to accelerate many of our plans around online or testing and piloting new formats for learning that we would have taken much longer to do. So having that ability to experiment, to move things forward, to move much quicker, which at a university, at a business school, we can sometimes that can be difficult. We had the ability to do so. And so looking forward, of course, I see challenges ahead, but also I really see it with a lot of optimism. So I look forward to talking about these things in more detail.
Oh, tremendous. Tom, how about you? Do you share the same perspective of this dichotomy of opportunity and challenge, sort of
Sure.
Opposite to one another?
Sure. And I appreciate Nora going first, because I want everybody to hear that I would say exactly what Nora said. So take her 90 seconds and I'll use 90 seconds for something different. For 50 plus years, Wilson Learning's been a leader in driving human performance improvement. And as Todd so nicely pointed out, I've been part of a lot of those years. Having said that, one of the things that I think is really important, that there's a phrase that we've been using for quite a while at Wilson Learning. I don't care what you learn, but I really care what you use. And I think the fact is that the state of where we are is we were already moving in the direction of technology-enabled part of our solution. But the reality is the core of what we did from the learning perspective was face-to-face instructor-led training. And up to last year, the technology side was more, how do we help enable the application, the use, the practice, the implementation to produce behavior change and get business results. Well, to Nora's point, along came the pandemic, and the option to do the face-to-face was kind of, literally taken away from us. And so one of my favorite quotes that I've been using, and I know there are Wilson people on the Zoom this afternoon who are about to roll their eyes and go, there he goes again. But it was from Thomas Jefferson, and he basically said, in matters of style, swim with the current. In matters of principle, stand like a rock. And I think part of what we're facing that Nora talked about is as we're putting rapid response teams together, we're pivoting, we're moving more toward virtual instructor-led, more toward learning on the platform that we're partnering with NovoEd to do. It's really important that we have a good grasp on that which must by definition change, matter of style, but yet that which cannot change, matter of principle, like sound instructional design or whatever that might be. And so I think our challenge is how do we move quickly in a way that shows that we're adaptable and flexible, but that we're not selling our soul for quick transitions to things just to get a quick buck because they can't come together. How do we protect the integrity of the learning and the usage of the critical skills? And I can certainly talk more about that.
Oh, brilliant. Scott, I'd be really intrigued to hear from your perspective the nature of similar thoughts, sentiments from both Nora and Tom, or a different vantage point from where you stand.
Yeah, definitely. First, can I just say, Tom, I've never heard that Thomas Jefferson quote before. I love it. And so maybe it does get stale on the 10th or 15th hearing, but I love that.
It doesn't stop me, Scott.
Yeah. So if you are involved in corporate learning as a technology provider, as a buyer, as a implementer, or as an investor, and you thought 2020 was an incredibly disruptive, hectic year, hold on to your digital hats. 2021 is going to be far more disruptive, fast-moving, fast-paced, and changing. And the reason I feel that way is that, sort of as Nora and Tom were saying, in 2020, people had to react very quickly to this external, hugely disruptive force. And so they were in crisis management mode. Some industries were being devastated, others were being swamped with new demand. And so they were reacting to that. And that caused companies and providers to have to respond to them and be able to work with them. Now we're in a mode of rapid adaptation, innovation, change. And so what I'm seeing as I think about this market as an investor is lots of capital going into the space, people who, that was already kind of true. It was a fairly hot market, e-learning, but it's hotter than ever. That's true in K-12, it's true in higher ed, but it's absolutely true in workforce. And innovation, really good entrepreneurs getting out of the industry that they're in and attracted to this industry. And so the great news for companies and buyers is they're going to have more choice, more great solutions. The bad news for them, more solutions, more options, more need to integrate those, and still in a world that is LMS dominated. And how do you kind of tack onto that? So I think it's going to be, we're going to return, though we'll return to normalcy, hopefully, in our society and in so many other things we do. We are not returning to normalcy in the corporate ed tech world.
Brilliant. I think maybe that's a perfect segue as we think about collectively characterizing some of those deltas from this past year. I think since Tom did a quote, now I want to do a quote. So I'll give you some Churchill, right? Those who fail to learn from the past are condemned to repeat it. And I don't think any of us should be condemning anyone on this call, but we'd be remiss if we didn't think about the lessons learned from these past 12 plus months. So I know there's a couple themes I heard, Nora, from you and Tom, and one of those that stands out, and I'd love to hear folks please weigh in on the chat, just this concept and characterization around acceleration and the sort of massive compaction of planning time and what happened there. Can you share with us a little bit, Nora, from your perspective about what world you were forced into and some of those changes that you made and the timelines? Because I think I have to believe that was felt similarly across our audience today.
Absolutely. So for our Carlson Executive Education Unit, we run anywhere between 50 to 60 programs per year. And those include short executive programs, 2 to 3 days on campus prior to COVID, and custom solutions for organizations. And so when we think back to March, when the effects of the pandemic really hit, everything just went to a screeching halt. Everything was just put on pause. And I'm sure some of you can relate to that in your own businesses of just, oh, well, we'll schedule this out 4 to 6 weeks. Well, that clearly kept moving out. But what we saw from our corporate partners was a standstill in the summer of just wait and see. We deal for our partnerships with a lot of the manager level, director, VP. And there's that bias there of we need to have them in person. We need to do these, we want to come to Carlson. We need to be together. There's that value of being in person. So a lot of it was put on hold. As we settled into the pandemic and got into the fall, and we could see this is not going away, we saw things coming back into motion, which thankfully that we did see that. And where I had clients that in let's even just say June, July said, no, I don't want these leaders. We don't want to do these programs online, really changing their tune and adapting. And so in that fall period, really getting back into delivering these programs online as we're saying. We experimented with many different formats of stretching out learning over longer periods of time. And also with platform. And this is where I will highlight our partnership with NovoEd, where I had some clients saying, this is leadership development. We can't do this online. And I said, no, just wait until you see what we are able to do online. And on the platforms like we partner with NovoEd, where you can really create these engaging experiences throughout a program and then bring together like this in Zoom settings or whatever platform we're on in a synchronous format to have these engaging learning experiences. And we found that our satisfaction did not drop from when we were in person. Of course, we were watching this like a hawk. Our participant and client satisfaction remained the same, was even higher in some cases. Of course, we got some of the comments, it would have been nice to see my colleagues and whatnot, sure. But we were pleasantly surprised in that way.
Tom, I'd be intrigued. Is there something to that myth-busting piece that you've had to deal with amongst your clients around this?
It's not, is there something? It's a big part of it. I would say it this way. The pandemic didn't cause what we're going through, but to Nora's point, it massively accelerated it. We were already moving in this direction. We were deep in conversations and beginning to work with NovoEd on the learning platform that we have working with them on. We had virtual instructor-led sessions, but a high percentage of what we did deliver was the face-to-face instructor-led. So when in March for us, it was basically that option was just ripped away from us. So then the question became, how do we respond? And it became, to Nora's point, it's like almost like a year of hurry up and wait. We had to respond really quickly, and yet a lot of she talked about her corporate partners, those are our buyers also. And so they were waiting, they were hunkering down, nobody was clear. When I said to my team, we're going home, it was the day before St. Patrick's Day. The first question was, how long? I said, a month, and everybody was shocked. That long? I think nobody could anticipate. So what did we do? They kind of hung in there. What they realized is they still had human performance improvement needs. They still had business challenges. They couldn't do nothing. Pardon my grammar. Here's the dilemma, is for many people not in the technical training or just skills and knowledge or compliance training, the notion of being able to deliver behavior change, performance improvement, not in a face-to-face setting, but in a virtual instructor-led or on a platform, they either had little or no experience, and the experience they had was it was pretty underwhelming. And so part of it was we had to move quickly to pivot and take our time-tested world-class content and not so much move away from that, because we were still selling. Todd, you introduced me as in Wilson Learning's part of leadership development and sales enablement. That's what we were selling. The question became, you can't consume it the way you want to, the way you used to. So our pivot was more increased flexibility in how we deliver that, how we support that. And then the second challenge, and we're still in the challenging part, is how do we help people who are skeptical feel comfortable that, hey, you know what, this isn't bad. And to Nora's point again, we had people who were hesitant to go through it and said, I really liked it. it was engaging, it was interactive. We were able to do a lot of the things we could do when we were in the classroom together, and I didn't have to get in a car and drive somewhere. I didn't have to travel somewhere. So part of the learning of the past is we've made that pivot, and I know we're going to talk a little bit more about what do we take going forward, and I'll save some more comments about that when we talk about that.
Scott, some other critical characteristics that stand out or characterizations from this year past, whether pulling on the theme of the acceleration or the myth busting about what's possible and what's not amongst these enterprise entities. I know you have a particular lens on that as well.
Oops, sorry, behind the curve on the mute button. So I want to answer that and also respond to a question I saw in the chat there, which is about what's happening with revenues in the space. So I think what's happened is the trends that were already pretty well established in e-learning and the shift for certain kinds of learning from in-person to digital. So compliance training, for example, had already gone from 0% digital to 80 or 90% online. But other kinds of learning, like sales enablement, leadership development, had gone from 0 to 20 or 0 to 25. And kind of the technology trends, the macroeconomic trends, the societal trends driving that change have now really, really accelerated. And they're not going to fall back very much. So what's happening in the space and in revenues is that before the pandemic, the market overall for learning and development spend was going up by quite a bit. Because companies are responding to younger learners, younger employees who really, really demand this of their employer, that their employer be investing in their skills and in their development. They rate that, in fact, number one on the things that they care about the most, to be attracted to and stay with an employer. So that already had been rising more like 8 to 10%, whereas in the previous 10 years or so, it may have been going up by 2 or 3% a year. And recessions, as the questioner asked, I think it was Jeff, that in past recessions, you see an immediate 20 or 25% reduction in spend on L&D because you just cut your trainers, you just stop doing a lot of that. So what's happened now is that if you were already only in digital learning, you were probably growing in the high teens, 18%. Assessment firms, LXPs, talent platforms, AR, VR, video practice, those were really robust, growing from a small base in the high teens. Their growth last year went up from there to probably 25, 30%. LMS is still pretty flat. The LMS very mature, long-term contracts. It's deeply penetrated into the corporate space. So I think that's only going to decline over time. Where you were more vulnerable, if you were exclusively or primarily in-person learning, it was a tough year. It was a very tough year, and you've got to be able to recover fast from that. But the market overall grew faster, I think, than it did before.
Yeah, maybe that's, I'd love to, Tom, can I come back to you on this? The idea of if we shift a little bit and forget or not forget, but leave behind sort of the look back model, and we talk about what we believe to sort of.
Forget it, Todd.
Do you see what I'm trying to, do you see what's happened to me over these 12 months based on my intro picture from Steve? It's dire, it's dire. But in all candor, the idea of what you believe will persist. I know you alluded to this a little bit, things in terms of we sort of trend and a bit of the forward looking, the pieces are sort of what remains anew, or what happens anew versus what what persists. Love to get your take on that, and I'm sure people are intrigued on the line.
Well, I would say two things. A very quick example, because I love this example, and I think it's timely for what we're going through. I was working with an R&D team about how aggressive and risky they wanted to be in change going forward versus how conservative they want to be. And they were having this back and forth argument. And the conservative gang was pushing for, conservative approach, the risky, more rapid. And in frustration, one of the people who was pushing for more change kind of shouted out, you guys, you talk about wanting to change, but the reality is if you were back in the early 1900s and you were trying to contemporize transportation, you'd insist that you have to keep the horse. And that's not going to take us forward. And so part of what's happened is, if we look at our industry, the horse was the face-to-face instructor-led training. That got taken away as an option this past year. So going forward, I think that when we can return, whenever that is, one of two things is going to occur. People will go back to using face-to-face instructor-led training like they did in the past, because they can, and they would prefer that. And yet the learning from this past year is, some people say, you know what, we've already kind of moved away from that. We don't necessarily have to go back to that. We've found viable alternatives, whether it's virtual face-to-face or via the LXP, as Scott referenced. So I think going forward, what we're going to take with us is those that return to more of a face-to-face oriented for the learning side of this. They will go back with a new appreciation for the power of the technology-enabled stuff, so that face-to-face learning will now be much more multimodal. It won't be just a learning event in a classroom. It'll be more, how do we keep what we've learned works incorporated and going forward, even though we can return to face-to-face. So it has to do with the way that we use technology to reinforce, to follow up. Scott referenced video. I can't be with my manager, but I sure can record a video of me doing a model or a skill and get feedback, get some coaching, and so forth. Secondly,
hey, Tom.
Yeah.
Just to react to that, there's another very practical reason why I think companies will feel a bit of a hesitation to go back to the way it was, which is they just laid off 25 or 30% of their instructors, and they just signed 2-3-year contracts with software companies. And so it's not like they can just pivot back to the way it was. They're going to want to get the ROI out of the investment they're making in technology.
It's another one of those, just because you can doesn't mean you should. You can go back, that doesn't mean you should. And so then we need to capitalize on, what have we learned? We've learned it really is still a combination of really high-class, world-class intellectual property. It's sound, engaging, behavior change-oriented instructional design. It's what's the right technology for the right need. It's an integration of all of that. And even if the primary use of the learning is not face-to-face anymore, to Scott's point, what is it about those vehicles like virtual instructor-led or the platform that we need to incorporate so it does in fact produce behavior change? It does in fact lead to business results. And I think that's part of what we've learned to do this year that will be a requirement going forward when we're, whatever we want to call post-pandemic. And just one thing, last thing very quickly. Before the pandemic, our customers were less and less interested in a brand solution, in something that was configured specifically for their business need and their challenges. And what we've learned, even as we've gotten our revised versions of it, virtual instructor-led or our platform-based, they still want to say, yes, that's great, but we need to do this for our organization. We need to do this for our audience. And so another thing that we've learned is, how do we do that configuration when we're doing virtual instructor-led or LXP related, where we used to do it when it was primarily face-to-face instructor-led. That's going to carry forward also.
How about Nora? I'd be intrigued as practitioner and steward. I mean, there's a lot that Carlson stakes its reputation, and wonderfully so, on. Is it as simple as that? Is that just because you can, should you return? Or how are you all thinking about it today?
There's two things I would highlight of kind of those things will carry forward. And one is just building on Tom, on your point, and Scott, of more flexible solutions. And I believe some things will go back in person, but not the same as it was before. We can ladder in, and this is where I see a real opportunity for corporate L&D professionals, for partners like Carlson Executive Education, like all of us here on this call, to design those learning experiences, because we know when do we need that impact to come together as a group? When can something just be asynchronous? When I can just consume that content on my own. And so I think that's where learning professionals are going to have a great spot to really be guiding how those experiences are designed. So that's one. The other one I would highlight, and I think this is really positive, is we are opening up, we're broadening our reach. Because we have done so many things online, it gives us that option to reach more leaders, more learners, more employees. So I'll give you an example. I had a client come to me and say, we'd like to do a session, to engage with our leaders, on resilience, on being resilient during these difficult times. Well, if we were going to do that in person, that would probably be 30 or 35 leaders, whoever can fit in the classroom and kind of have this intimate discussion. And they said, look, I want to open this up to my whole our whole corporate office here to 100. Why do I need to limit this to those 20 people with a certain title? So that's just a small example, but I really see an opportunity to reach much broader, to have our solutions available to many, many more leaders, learners, employees. And I think that's a great thing.
Scott.
Hey, Nora, to your point, I think the business model for executive education is about to undergo a really big bifurcation based on the goal. And so if the goal of a 4-hour program is knowledge transfer from an expert researcher around M&A finance or whatever the topic is, people may not want to drive in and park in downtown Minneapolis or downtown Chicago and do that. Maybe you can attract them with a happy hour or something afterwards, but that's probably going to go online. And the 1-week program on, stepping into a major leadership role, which there's a huge value around the network building and this immersive, intensive experience, whether it's in Minneapolis or Switzerland. That's a pretty compelling value proposition, and that's not going to go online. And so you really have to think about the right delivery mode depending on what you're trying to accomplish. And executive ed is I think behind on this transformation, but is going to have to move quickly.
Scott, you bring up a great point. And I will go back to a point that you made. Some of you on this session may have attended another NovoEd webinar in which, Scott, Todd, you were facilitating it, and with Josh Burson and yourself, Scott, talking about trends in learning and development. And you made that distinction between skills and capabilities. So if I just need, when we're talking about knowledge transfer, to your point, kind of those just pure knowledge transfer, learning a framework, learning a business model, I can do that. And I can quite frankly do that on a lot of these platforms almost at free or very, very low cost. And that's fine. And I myself leverage that content. That's great. When we're talking about things like digital transformation, how is my business going to be shaped moving forward? Leadership skills, shaping my business moving forward. That's when there is that value proposition to, come together. And when I say come together, I do mean that could be in person or in an engaging live online experience like we are here, and really dive deeper on those and build those capabilities.
Right.
Tom, how about your perspective? I know this idea of also the similar challenges you're seeing from your enterprise clients in terms of wrestling deeply with what they return to, or is it really more of a generalized question? They've got clarity and it's just a matter of timing and they're sort of at the ready in terms of their forward pursuit.
Well, I think I said this earlier. I think when they are able to return to face-to-face as an option, they will. But I don't think, and I think Scott referenced, I don't think they'll go back. It won't have the same dominant role that it once had. And it won't look like it once did, which was much more of a learning event, more of a one-off. And I go back to I don't care what you learn, I care what you use. And the research on learning transfer is startling with how rapidly people forget and don't use what they learned in a one-off event. And that, if we're serious about behavior improvement, behavior change, behavior improvement that leads to business results, you can't tolerate that rapid drop-off of usage post-session. And so then what are your options? I think, one of the options is you need to build in ways, both pre and post, to make this much more, Nora used the word learning experience. We've been using the word a learning journey. How do we move it from an event to a journey in which there's preparation before the session, So let's say it's a sales session. Come to the session prepared for who's the customer you're going to be working on. What are the issues that you're facing with them? Have some agreement with your manager about how you're going to be focused on this. So I spent years as a classroom facilitator, and I'd start a session saying, so why are you here? And they go, I don't know, my boss sent me. Well, that's not real good learner prep to pay attention. And so that when you leave the session, how do we help tap into the number one and number two issues that extend the learning into ongoing usage? One is the role of the manager or the coach, and second is peer-to-peer. There's a lot of things that we can do that enable them to come together for best practice sessions, to get coaching help, to get follow-up. And so my point is that they will return to face-to-face, but they won't return accepting just an event that doesn't produce any kind of change. That was already in place, but I think their experience with alternative ways to deliver learning and support via technology has given them the confidence to do more of that going forward. And they won't tolerate multimodal interventions, experiences.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Tom, you've got a sort of a chat just sort of flying in there from Mara Simmons, who's sort of recounting they're doing some efforts on happens to be a Nova platform, but the idea of combining the virtual application sessions, with those pre and post experiences, and the two pieces that stood out from that perspective, right, are the one-on-one coaching post, that idea, that piece, and then that application of skill OTJ on the job. And I think we all, as learning folk, thinking back to the power of a retrieval event paired with an encoding event, almost more impactful with that spaced learning. Being forced to return to it at some later date and time and putting it in context of the job, I think is exceedingly powerful in that sense. Might I feather in another question? This one comes from Katie about how do you mitigate the price expectations versus value in online learning when there is a flood of free or low cost options, Nora, as you stated. How do you show your value? And Scott, I don't know if you want to take a stab at that to start, and we can go around the horn.
Yeah, I'll start quickly. Let's take it from the buyer's perspective. So from the whether it's chief learning officer, learning leader, SVP of sales, somebody who has a learning objective for themselves or somebody on their team, you can definitely go out. If you want it to be self-paced, you don't particularly care about the delivery methodology, watching videos most likely, and you're willing to do some searching, you can find free videos on virtually anything out there in the business world. So for certain kinds of things, that's perfectly fine. In fact, that might be a good way to go. The frustration, though, will come in finding the best one or finding an acceptable one, because you're going to have to do a lot of digging. LXPs can be helpful with that. And if your company has subscribes to paid services like Pluralsight or LinkedIn Learning or something like that, what Degreed or Edcast or one of the LXPs can help you do is much more quickly develop a learning pathway on that content. Now, that's not free. That means you have to be subscribed to those services. If your learning objective is anything more, you care about the efficiency of it, you want to have interaction, you have to have a platform designed for that. Even your LMS is going to come up short in delivering the experience that you need. It won't be adaptive. It won't be interactive. It won't allow video sharing, that kind of thing. And so I think you just got to be, free content can work for certain things. Paid content can work for higher order things where you'll also get some vetting of quality. But it's the learning experience, the journey, as Tom talks about, where mentoring, coaching, feedback, whether self-paced or cohort-based learning, you really need a platform or an experience that's built to do that.
I got to believe Tom. Nora, please.
No, please, Tom, go ahead.
I feel like I pulled out every old quote I've used in years. Scott, there's an infinite market for free services, right? But if the issue is we really are interested in performance improvement and business results, part of what we've built into the work we've done with NovoEd and the learning experience platform and all other work we do and however it's delivered is what we call impact evaluation. It's like, what are the business metrics that you are looking to drive and change as a result of the learning? One of our colleagues has a great phrase. He goes, people don't need training. People just don't need training. What they need is the result of training. They need to be able to change how they approach things and produce business results. So what we need to be clear on up front is, what are the business results that you're looking, like if leadership's the answer, what's the problem? If sales development is the answer, what's the problem? We need to understand what are the business metrics that you're looking to improve as a result of learning, and then look at the result of that. So you talk about value, you don't sell price, you sell value. And you talk about what kind of value you're looking for and what will it take to do that, and what does it cost you to not do anything? And I think, the focus is really, to the question, it's on value, not on price.
Yeah, Tom, just to throw a little gasoline on that, is that, what's not going down, but will be going up continuously this year, 2022, 2023, beyond, is the need and the demand for people to rapidly, efficiently, and in a consumer grade technology kind of experience, gain new skills and competencies, because jobs are changing so fast at an accelerating pace. It's producing a lot of anxiety out in the workforce. It's kind of hollowing out the middle skills and the middle class, contributing to income inequality. There are a lot of challenging trends. And so the demand for the impact of learning, the results of learning, being more nimble, being more employable, being able to meet your employer's expectations for your role, stepping into new jobs that haven't even been created yet, that demand is only going to go up.
In Nora, just if I could, 1 minute. I read 2 articles this week that talk about when able to go back to face-to-face selling, many sales organizations won't. They'll continue to sell virtually. And so they better be facile in selling virtually, which can be delivered virtually, or they won't succeed in the sales relationship, because they may not be going back to going into an office and visiting face-to-face. That demand is acute and it's immediate, and it has an impact on the revenue generation ability of an organization.
Yeah, dinner at the steakhouse and 3 martinis won't be your sales model anymore. All the time.
Yeah, exactly. Don't rule it out completely, Scott. I feel like all the sales folks that are on the line are getting very upset right now.
That's the contract signing ceremony, Scott.
Let's continue that thread. Let's ask you all to put on a little bit of that forward-thinking Nostradamus style hat, and let's talk predictions. I know a lot of folks, are probably eager to understand. We've shared a little bit about what lays ahead for sort of 2021. Scott, you started to reference some of those pieces around the absolute criticality of the continuous changing nature of skills, and the need for deep capability building is only going to accelerate and increase. What other predictions become sort of top of mind that you think all of these folks are on, whether they're from the edtech space or on the executive ed side or from the corporate learning? What should they be putting on their radars? Nora, do you want to start us off on this note?
Sure. I'd love to take that one. And I'll come at that from the corporate learning side, and then maybe from kind of our exec ed leader learner side. Echoing a lot of the comments, Scott and Tom, that you were highlighting here about all the different options now for online learning solutions. I think that role of the learning leader, the CLO, the L&D leader, is going to continue to be a critical one. And we've talked about this. I mean, we've always talked about the importance of L&D leaders to be able to align initiatives with business strategy. And of course, that remains and is critical. But now we have that opportunity and challenge with all these solutions. So there's many different content partners, many different platforms, all of these options. And so it really becomes, I think it's going to be very critical for these L&D leaders to discern those partnerships. Where is going to be the focus, and how are they going to integrate those internally? Because we all know you can go look at the best platform or the best content out there, but if you can't integrate that into your LMS or into your internal processes or negotiate those agreements, we can always run into roadblocks there. So I think there's a great opportunity for learning leaders to be navigating all the different options that they have at their disposal now. And I overall, I see that as exciting. There are challenges too.
Not daunting, nor
not daunting. Yeah, right. For when I think about solutions for leaders from our exec ed perspective, we really we're thinking a lot. I'm hitting on common themes we've mentioned here: flexible solutions and that personalization too. When you think about leaders today, there are some common challenges for sure, but everyone has their each individual context. So Tom, you had mentioned coaching as well, and follow-up, and making sure that our learning, whatever they're learning in our courses from our faculty and our learning experiences, they can apply immediately. Those checks, I think that will be crucial. And in terms of I always like to focus on leadership. I see real challenge, in a good way, challenges for leaders to have that lens of where their business is going through digital transformation, through changing customer client preferences, demographics, societal pressures, really having that lens of where your industry is going. And then those leadership pieces, that being able to adapt, constantly change, leadership agility. And I will highlight as well, being an inclusive leader, because we have seen such a demand for that, prior to kind of more recent events over the summer that we've experienced here in the US, but even more so now. I think that will be a persistent trend as well.
And Nora, I might come back to you on a tremendous question from Eugene, but before I do that, if you want to take a peek in the chat, Tom, thoughts, predictions, top of mind that you think folks should be cognizant and mindful of as this year unfolds?
Yeah, I know that there's a lot of temptation to look at, new shiny things and, the role that artificial intelligence and all that plays, and we will get there. It will be a big part of our industry going forward. But I want to go back to the notion that it's not new, but it is, I think, part of the future, which is, if we've learned anything in this past year, it's the importance of a learning journey in which it is extended learning over time. And the note that Ruth had written into the chat box about part of what intrigued us to work with NovoEd was that the platform allows us to do many of the things that people are intrigued by in a face-to-face session, about the community groups, about the ability to get feedback from peers, getting coaching from the facilitator. I mentioned having spent a lot of years in the classroom. I didn't spend a lot of one-on-one time with a group of 20 on the LXP that we're working on with some of our core products. Learners get individual feedback from the coach, but it's also a hybrid of, and in between, there are virtual instructor-led sessions where they come together like on a Zoom, and they talk, and they go to breakout rooms, and they practice, and they share. And so I think the future is going to be this drawing on what do the humans do best, what does the technology do best, and if there's a word that makes sense to me, it's hybrid. How do we hybrid the best integration of that so that it's an engaging experience, it's one that people learn from, and they in fact are able to change the way they perform at work. And I think that, to me, to Nora's point about it's challenging, it really shifts the role that L&D people play, because to Scott's point earlier, a lot more choices, therefore that's the good news. Bad news is a lot more choices. But it's really not only challenging, but tremendously excited about how do we change the world one person at a time by using and capitalizing on all the tools we have in our toolkit. I think it's a fabulous future.
So Scott, is that, I know you and I talk a lot about, and you have a wonderful coin phrase, is it truly, are we on the cusp of the golden age for corporate enterprise learning?
I do think we are, but it's going to take a few years for companies to harness the technology that's available right now. And I agree with you, Tom. I think we're still in experimentation when it comes to machine learning, AI, AR, VR. There's great, cool stuff going on out there, but let's jog before we sprint. And so we need to harness the technologies that are out there right now into a seamless user experience that matches the kind of technology experiences that employees have on their phones at home and on their computers at home. And we need to deliver that to them in the workplace, and we're not doing that right now. And so 2 predictions, or I don't know if they're predictions, but I think there will be a shakeout in the industry if you look at this proliferation of suppliers, of providers. But I don't think it happens in 2021 because there's too much new capital coming into the space, and that's going to prop up all sorts of different experimentation and different companies and fund lots of unprofitable operations that are trying to get a foothold. So that's okay. That's good news. It means there's a lot of experimentation going on out there. I do think in 22 and 23, there will be a big shakeout. And the winners and the losers will separate, and there will be more unicorns in the ed tech space like Guild Education and Coursera and these companies that were tiny, like 20 minutes ago, and now they're worth over $1 billion. And then there'll be ones dropping out, getting acquired, basically dropping out of competition. The other prediction that I wanted to put out there, and as a partial response to Eugene's question, self-serving or not, is about Eugene. I thought it was a great question. Is about what do trainers, instructors, mentors, faculty at executive ed programs, what do they have to do to fully take advantage of this? Does the pedagogy need to change? Do the skill sets need to change? My take on this, and I'm kind of wonky on pedagogy for adults, to the point I'm such a tool that I refer to it as andragogy, because adults do learn differently than children or adolescents. And that's a really important thing to take on board when you're teaching adults. You have to acknowledge the expertise that they bring to the table. You don't necessarily have to do that with an 8-year-old or even a college student. And there is a number of other things. But what faculty need to do, what learners or what trainers, mentors, coaches do need to do is be very skilled at addressing the same learning needs as adults. The ways adults learn is not going to change, but using the tools to tap into that and to tap into it quickly and well and effectively and in a way that's fun and engaging. And you got to be able to do that. And I think there are faculty members and trainers who are already way there, and they're amazing in how they can quickly film a video response with feedback to somebody and shoot it off to them. And a person has that 90 seconds later and can watch it as many times as they want. And other people who just replicate their classroom experience with a camera online. And so I do think that tools, tactics, best practices will need to change. And that's great for the learners. And it'll mean different people are the superstars on your faculty or on your team.
So it's place your bets, place them wisely, and be prepared for the change that is coming at a more rapid pace, kind of thing. I want to be mindful of the time a little bit here. We just have a few minutes. Other sort of final parting shots, words of wisdom from Nora, Tom, or Scott before we take this to a bit of a close at the top of the hour.
Nora, please go. I do, but Nora, please go.
Sure. I think one of the things that I'll end on, and it's kind of along that point of having our learning solutions available to more people, being able to have more impact. And one of the things we've seen, and it ties into this instructor question a little bit as well, but one of the things that we've seen in online environments is we actually get, in some cases, more rich participation of everyone there. So sometimes when we're in the classroom face to face, it's just the loudest voice in the room dominates, and a couple people, we'll hear most from them. Whereas in the online space, and this is where, like, with skilled facilitators, instructors, faculty, we can really get all of the voices heard and really more collaborative experiences. And I think that's really great moving forward for everyone, from the learner perspective, from the corporate perspective, and I think that's really positive.
Yeah, the sheer manifestation of DE&I at its best, right, Nora? That's really what that is.
That's right.
Let's go. Tom, I know you had a closing thought there for folks.
I go way back to freshman psychology. And one of the best things I learned was people do things for their reasons, not yours. And I think part of what excites me is we've not all these tools and delivery flexibility we've talked about. It still comes down to how do we help people learn in a way that they want to learn. That's part of the flexibility. But also, how do we don't sell them on what they need to do differently. We need to help them buy. They need to get grounded in why it's important for them to change and do what we're asking them. That challenge doesn't change because of the role of technology. It's how do we help people see that there's something in it for me to behave differently, and I do it for my reasons, not for yours. And I think, to Nora's point, we just get the opportunity to reach a whole lot more people. Do that as long as we don't lose what Scott said about the andragogy. I don't know if I can say that word. That we're dealing with adults that they need to do things for their reasons, not ours.
I love the nobility of that, in true sincerity, Tom.
Yeah, and I'll just throw in that CEOs and general managers at companies right now are dealing with some of the most challenging and vexing workplace issues that they've ever encountered, and their boards are holding them accountable to improve on diversity, equity, inclusion, not just in recruitment and in hiring, but in outcomes, in workplace culture. And those are very tough needles to move. And just think about how hard they're to move in a completely virtual working environment. And so I think some of these innovations and companies' ability to deploy them well actually can give these companies a leg up on getting better around DE&I, just as an example of something that has gone from not an unimportant, but kind of a side issue to front and center for so many CEOs right now, whose frankly jobs are on the line if they don't get it right. And here's a whole suite of tools and capabilities, particularly about interaction, feedback, working with each other, not just watching a video and then taking a test, but let's use these in ways that advance against the company's biggest long-term cultural and really deep types of goals and objectives.
So let me say this: we've taken you past the top of the hour. The vision of a cocktail or an adult beverage is in your near future. A massive thank you to all of you that stayed online with us, and a special thank you to Nora, to Tom, to Scott, and a huge appreciation to Ed North in all of their orchestration to put this together and to allow this kind of dialogue to continue forward. So Steve, Adam, I'll turn it back to you. I think we might have a sort of a closing visual for folks.